Hey guys, Jen Engel from Mixed Media Jen here with Joggles.com to show you how I made these mini journals using some of the index cards that are available from Joggles.com. And this is using a no-sew, just glue binding technique. And I'm just going to quickly show you the index cards that I have to use today. This is a 3x5 size, which would be a standard index card size. And then the next size is 4x6. And these are watercolor paper, a really nice paper that is the Strathmore 400 series, 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. Really great watercolor paper. And then we have 5x7 in the watercolor paper. And then we also have that glorious, luscious black paper in the 5x7. This is the same paper that's in the disc bound journals that I cannot rave about this paper enough. It is the best black paper I have ever used. It just takes so much media. It's just the best. So I'm just going to go through and pick out my 3x5s and 5x7s. And I'm going to hold in my left hand my papers, and then or my index cards rather. We're just going to call them papers because I feel like I'm going to keep calling them that. And I'm just going to line them up the way I want them, staggering them, some towards the bottom, some at the top, and the bigger pages in between. And I'm making sure that all of the edges of my paper comes in contact with the surface that I'm working on, because it's important that they stay completely flush together for when we do the binding. So I'm going to clip them together, and if you have a book press, that would be helpful, but you don't need one. I'm going to show you how to do this without one. So I'm just going to take some washi tape and wrap that around my book to help make sure that the pages stay put. And then I need something to hold it upright so that I can work on the spine. So I just have these canvases, and I'm going to stick my book in between there. Anything would work, really, books, anything that you could get that height that you can stand your book up straight. And I'm going to take a piece of canvas and make sure it's the correct size to my book. You can use any kind of canvas, really. The thinner, the better, I found. And this piece is it's from the Dina Wakley Media Journal. I just cut the canvas out to use it for my binding, and it's like the perfect weight. So I'm gonna put a clip on the edge as well, because I really want to make sure my book stays together. And I thought I wanted to put that big clip on the side, but then I realized the middle of my book wasn't staying completely tight together, which is why it would be helpful to have a book press, because it keeps your book together like that, but you don't need one. See, I have my clip there, and it's staying together perfectly well. So the glue that I'm using is PVA glue, and this is the Sobo glue. Joggles Joggles has it in their shop, and it's a PVA glue that remains flexible once it's dry. That's important. Because like Elmer's glue is technically a PVA glue, but once it's dry, it's not flexible. So if you tried to do this with Elmer's glue, your book would just be like a hard blob and you wouldn't be able to open your pages. So this glue is perfect for that, and it dries super duper quick. So I'm just taking my paintbrush, and the glue comes in a bottle, but I keep it in like a little jar because it's easier for me to access that way. And dip my paintbrush in. So I'm just going in with a thin layer, and I'm also using my fingers to kind of hold my pages together, because it's a fine line. You want a thick enough layer so that the pages stay connected, but you don't want it so thick that it seeps down in between your pages, because then your pages are going to stick together when it's all dry. So I'm going to dry that layer with my heat gun. You can leave it to air dry, which is probably best, but for the sake of this video, I just dried it with my heat tool, which worked just fine. And then I'm going to go in with my second layer, and you can see that I don't really need to hold it now, because that first layer kind of keeps everything together. I do have a big gap there in the middle, but the second layer is going to take care of that. And that's why we're using many different layers. I've tried this using just one layer of glue, and the pages come out, and it's just better to use more layers because you get a better contact that way. So then I'm going in, I lost count. Is this my third layer? Probably. So I'm just going to go in the same way with my third layer. I'm going to dry that. And then I could probably stop at 3 layers, but for some reason I dried it and added a 4th layer. And this is the layer where we're going to add our canvas. So you could do this on your 3rd layer. I'm just going to add another strip of glue all along my book, and then I'm going to take my canvas and I'm kind of lining it up to my book to see exactly how thick I need to make my glue. If you make it a little bit wider than your spine, that's okay. We can fix that. It doesn't really matter too much, but I'm just going to take my glue and run a strip down the center. And it's canvas, so it will come out the back a little, but that's fine. It's going to dry and it's going to be flexible because of the type of glue that we're using. And I forgot to mention, it's important to put your biggest pages on the front and back when you put your book together, because when we attach the spine and the covers, you can use smaller pages, but I just find, for me personally, it's more difficult that way. So I'm going to lay my strip of canvas down across my spine, and I'm going to pinch my book together as I'm kind of pulling down my canvas so that it's very snug fitting. I don't want any gaps, any room for movement in there. And I'm also pressing down with my finger to make sure I have a really good connection on all the pages to my spine piece. Now, if you don't get a good connection and some of the pages are loose or whatever, I'll show you how we can fix that. I'm pulling a little bit of my canvas away from the covers because I went a little too zealous with the glue, but it's still wet enough that we can pull that canvas away. So I'm just going to flip through and make sure none of my pages are sticking together where glue had seeped down, and it looked pretty good. But so then I let it dry completely overnight, let it dry on its own, and I noticed that one of my pages was loose. So, and that'll happen, it's fine, we can totally fix it. So I'm just gonna take that page out, remember where it was in the book, and I'm gonna take a teeny tiny paintbrush and put a teeny tiny strip of glue all along the edge of my paper there. It's kind of like applying glue to the strip of a fake eyelash. It's very tedious. So you want to make sure you get good coverage all along your edge, and then just press it into the book where it was, and there will be a space for it, and it'll go in just fine. You can just hold it there for a couple seconds. This glue dries very, very quickly, so it'll get tacky in no time, and you can leave it go. So to work on our covers, I'm going to use some craft paper. Joggles has the rolls of the craft paper in their shop, which is fantastic. I like to use it as underpaper, and if you do use it as underpaper, then you don't have to decorate your covers. You could just cut your cover to the size of your book, and it's already decorated with paint, which I think is one of the nice things about using underpaper. So I'm just going to cut it to the size of my cover, which is 5x7, and I know that because I use the 5x7 index card. I'm going to cut the front and back, and then I'm going to take some of my Dina Wakley Media turquoise paint and the Cat Kerr Reinforcements foam stamp to add a little bit of color to my cover. So I'm just going to apply that with my brayer and then stamp down onto my paper. And I love the way that teal looks against that craft. I think that is such a nice contrast. And then I'm just going to add the excess from my back cover. I'm not as concerned with my back cover being a perfect stamp. So for the rainbow binding strips, I'm going to take some cotton fabric and I'm going to dye them with whatever I have on hand. This is the Lemon Zest Dilutions, and I used just distress spraying for some of the other colors, whatever you have on hand. Joggles has the cotton fabric that's ready to take dye. It's like it has like you're supposed to prepare your fabric first so that it doesn't react weirdly with whatever dye you use. And Joggles has that kind of fabric in, which is nice. So I'm just going to hang that to dry, and then the excess, I'm going to run some paper through to not waste, and then we're going to use those excess papers later. I'll show you at the end of the video. So then after all of my strips of fabric are colored and dry, I'm just going to take little strips of each one. I'm going to cut a notch into each color and then rip it. You can cut it, but I like a more tattered edge look. So I'm just going to do that to all my colors. So the colors that I used from left to right are Cracked Pistachio, Mermaid Lagoon, Blueprint Sketch. Those are Distress Spray stains. And then I used Crushed Grape, which is Dilutions. And then back to the stains, I used Abandoned Coral and Picked Raspberry, Wild Honey. And then this is the Lemon Zest that I showed you. I'm just going to cut strips from all of them. And then I'm going to line them up in a rainbow order that I kind of like. I'm kind of trying to do like Roy G. Biv, but I don't really have the exact colors. So I'm just kind of going like green is the Cracked Pistachio and violet is the Crushed Grape, just so that it looks a little bit like a rainbow. And you can arrange them in whatever order you want. And I'm just going to space them out how I think it looks okay. You can measure it, of course, but I'm not that type of girl. So I'm just going to eyeball it. And then I'm going to use a little bit of a tape runner to add a little bit of glue down so I can adhere them. But it doesn't need to be like a really permanent sticky glue because we're going to stitch these on. We just need something to hold them on until we can get it over to the sewing machine and run it through the sewing machine. So I ran the whole thing through my sewing machine once around the whole thing, and then the edge where the strips are, I just did like a little wavy line so that it's two stitches going down that edge. And then I'm going to wrap it around my book, and that's what I'm going to use to measure how wide the opening needs to be. First I'm going to cut some of those threads down just because it's like too much getting in the way. So I want to make them like a little bit more manageable. And when I made this one, what I did was I took my back cover and I put it against my front cover and then added the glue where the strips were, not realizing that when I put it on the back, it was going to be backwards. So with my second book, I got smart and I laid down my back cover like I'm showing you here. And then I put the glue so that I put it exactly where the strips needed to be. And they were a little off because I did it the wrong way, but you know, you live and you learn, right? And if you have any like glue, excess glue, tape runner glue, you can just use an eraser to erase it away. It takes a little bit, but that's what I did, and it completely got rid of the glue, and it looked fine then. So then I'm just gonna pull my strips around, and I want to make sure they're very snug. I don't want any room, any gaps in there. I just want to make sure it's very snug against my spine. And then some of the glue didn't stick right because I didn't put the glue in the right spots. So I'm just going to make sure that the fabric stays stuck. And then I'm going to run that through my sewing machine. I just did one stitch all around the back cover because I wanted the front to be a little more fancy than the back. But you could do whatever you wanted on the back. And then I'm just going to cut those excess strips so it kind of is the same length as the ones in the front. And then I'm going to fray the pieces of fabric a little bit so it's not like a straight cut line. And then we're going to attach our covers to those little canvas flaps that we had when we applied the canvas to our book. So I'm just going to use the same PVA glue, the same Sobo glue. And I'm going to put a piece of scrap paper underneath my canvas because it will seep through because it is fabric, so it does have holes in it. And I'm just going to make sure that I apply glue all over completely from edge to edge all over my book because I want my cover to stay stuck really, really well. This is the piece that is going to connect our cover to our book, so we want to make sure that it's going to stay put where we want it. So then once I'm happy with the glue application, I'm just going to stick down my cover, make sure the edges are flush. I'm going to flip my scrap paper around so that the scrap paper doesn't stick to the canvas there, and smooth out any of those edges. And that's it for the gluing the front, and we can move on to gluing the back. And we're going to do it in the exact same way, adding the glue from edge to edge, and then just pulling the back cover around and making sure it's very snug. You can pull with a decent amount of force to make sure that everything stays aligned. And then that is how it's gonna look. Pretty cool, I think. And there are many different things you can do with them. I was gonna add a quote stamp to my cover, but I couldn't decide on one, honestly, so I just left it alone, and maybe I'll come back to it and add something to it. But for now, I like the way it looks. In and show you the finished project. So if you remember when I had the excess ink and I sopped some of that up with my watercolor paper, I just cut little tabbies out of them and machine stitched them with black thread here and there staggered throughout my book in the same kind of rainbow as the threads, because obviously the colors matched. I just like the threads hanging, and I think it adds a little extra something. And then this is the big version. This has the big cards as well as the black paper, and the difference on here is the cover has 3 stitches down instead of a zigzag, and like I said, it has the black cards and it's obviously bigger. But I also sprinkled in some vintage papers, some vintage ledger paper, some sheet music, checks, etc. And you make this in the same way as I showed you this one. You just add your extra papers in between the index cards. So thank you so much, Joggles, for having me. I'm super excited about how these turned out, and I am excited to see what you guys do with the index cards. All right, thanks for watching. Bye-bye, guys.